here are the materials that I'm going to use today. They're all charcoal, but they're a charcoal pencil. So essentially, this one is it's sort of like a pastel, sort of like a charcoal, but this is set like a pencil inside wood. So it's less dirty, I guess. Now I'm going to use brown paper, this thick card, and that will allow the white to come through strongly. This one here's got a lot of good contrast. I'm going to reuse that one, which I've used in a previous video, but I'll change the composition a little bit so that it's perhaps a bit more, including a bit more detail, and looks a bit more like a still life that you would imagine it, like a still life typically looks. Something like this, where you see various arrangements of several objects rather than just one by itself, something like this. Now, when I start, I'm going to start with the darkest tones and then the very lightest tones. But of course, let's get a sketch in first. So I'm going to start with the apple somewhere here, slightly off to the side perhaps. And then the cloth in the background. Maybe I'll put a simple pattern on there, change the sort of pattern that's visible on this one perhaps. To, you know, exercise a little bit of artistic license. Make sure to get some nice angles so the apples look actually like apples and not like oranges or something like that. I'm relatively happy with that composition. Now I'll just get the few details like the stem. Now again, I'm not putting much pressure, same with charcoal. I'm just putting the most minimal pressure possible, just so that we can have our sketch changeable if we really want to. And as with charcoal, I'm going to start by blocking in some of the shadows, the main shadows. Now with this, it's because it's more of an oily, waxy kind of feel than charcoal proper, you can be a bit more precise with it. You can sort of get a bit more subtle shadowing going on, whereas with a stick of charcoal, there's a little bit more expressionistic line work that you utilize, whereas with this one you can sort of gradually, like a pencil, block in your shadows. So in some senses it's a bit like pencil and a little bit like charcoal, so somewhere between. Now again, I'm just being very quick and loose here just to get my basics happening. Just blocking in the shadows, just so I know where they are. And then that just helps me much later on to get it all looking good. Okay, now the top of the cloth, the bottom of the cloth is up here. We'll continue up there. Okay, this probably can come up a little bit. There's a bit of shadow over here. Shadow here. So this is obviously not all the shadows, but it's my main shadows. And as soon as I've got my main shadows here, I'm going to start with my main highlights. So I'll start by putting some highlights here where I can see reflection. Now reflection isn't the only place you're going to put the highlights, but they are the brightest highlights. Now this highlight and this shadow overlaps a little bit. That's totally fine. This should actually be going across a little bit. Made a little boo-boo there, but how are we? Oh, maybe the stem actually needs to go across a bit. We shall see where it takes us. Some highlight over here. And some over here. Making sure that the direction of the highlight is shown Now, I won't put too much emphasis on this highlight later because it'll pull the eye up towards the corner a bit too much. I don't want that. Now, these main shapes on the drapery, the cloth. Okay, and up here. Now this is our bones, the bones of the drawing. Now we're going to come back into this with our shadows and really get some of those shadows getting a bit darker and extend the shadows to the mid-tones. And remembering as well to try and direct our lines so that we're showing the form of this object. And what I might do is just at this point really deepen the shadows in the background. So I think that's what's really going to make that brown of the paper create like a bit of form all by itself. Make the image pop out a bit. So I'll push that right back and let this sort of loom out of the shadow of the background. And don't forget to turn your image as you need it. Rather than trying to turn yourself, turn the paper. You don't have to do this, which is really awkward. Naturally your hand wants to do this, so if you have to go like that, turn it all the way around. Sorry if that's making you dizzy. So you can see this apple really is starting to come out a little bit now. I might just leave this cloth to be a bit blank. Maybe no pattern whatsoever. Even though there's pattern on this one, I think I might just leave the tones as they are, so that they're not distracting, and so that these shadows point our eye towards the main subject, which is this central apple at the front. And again, I'll just push this background into shadow. And then even the cloth will come forward a little. Alright, so once I've done all this, I'll reassess and see where those shadows should go. Yes, I'm happy with where they were going already, but I will straighten this angle up here a bit, make it a bit more blocky, as apples can tend to do on the edges. Now here, I'm not outlining, but there is shadow here, which I'm going to try and define. I think my highlight was initially slightly out. I'm going to try and put that highlight right there instead of here. Just go over the top of that highlight there. Later I'm going to introduce a little bit of brown in there. Now the brown won't be exactly the same colour as the brown of the paper, but it will just sort of give it a bit of depth. So we'll have the brown of the paper in the background, which I'll allow to show in places, and then the brown of the pencil, the charcoal pencil as well, coming through a little bit for those mid-tones. And the good thing about having a dark background there is you can allow those lines like this to come right into the background, and it actually kind of just helps to darken it a little bit and doesn't detract from the image at all. Now, this is about where I want those browns that I was speaking about just a second ago. I'm just going to redefine this stem. I don't think I really liked where it was before. And get that really dark down in here. And coming up to there. It might start involving the brown now. Even in the stem perhaps. And then just over here as well, where I wanted it to be. And really with the brown, I'm going to just try to bringing that black out a little and leading it gently into the highlights. So wherever those mid-tones are at, that's where I'm going to start getting this brown happening. Now, not too much, just a little bit, right? Don't want to overdo it. Like I said, I want some of the brown of the paper to come through as well. Oh, I missed a bit of highlight over here. That's a bit better. Got a nice sharp angle there on the pencil. Getting that where I can see it better. Some of those highlights are being a little stubborn. I'm going to get that sharper angle along here, and then fading out a little bit from the shadow. You just want to get this one though really nice and clear. You might have pushed that a little bit too far into the shadow. But anyway, we will persist. Now I'm going to start flitting around now. Just wherever my eye takes me, that's where I'm going to go. And my eye is looking at the shape, and then only occasionally glancing back at my drawing. I'm worried about it looking like a tomato here, so I'm just going to try and make sure that I'm thinking about it being an apple the whole time. Okay, there we go. Getting these highlights a bit better. There we go. Bringing those forward a bit. Maybe pushing it down a little too. Okay, so we want these highlights and shadows both to point towards the apple. But we want that apple to come forward as well. So I want to just push this even harder down in there, I think. Maybe not right to the edge, but I think perhaps underdoing it in the background will help a lot. I'm just going to perhaps do a bit of this. so that we can still see that it's a cloth. But then now I'm due at lunch in a minute, so I'm gonna finish this off as quickly as I can, just to try and resolve it while I'm in the zone. So I'm feeling pretty good about where it's going, and I don't want to lose it. Not that you lose it too easily with a bit of practice. After a while you can put yourself back in the zone pretty readily. I'm just going to pop a bit more brown in places, a few more highlights, and then I think we're good. This stem I think needs a bit of work. Incorporate a bit of brown in there as well. Make this a bit bolder in there too. And I missed a highlight just here. That's better. If I just work that shadow in there, again that starts to direct the eye just subtly towards that apple in the foreground. I don't want to do too much more, because then we're going to end up with highly rendered realistic stuff everywhere, and oopsie daisy, that doesn't look very good. Just to work that back a bit, because that was a bit forced, and it feels a bit better. I just wanted to push that apple behind the cloth a bit, and nearly caused myself a disaster. I don't think I'm going to add any brown whatsoever into the cloth. I think we're going to leave the cloth alone, and then have just the brown in the apples only. And just push that back a bit and leave it a little lighter at the top there. Okay, I think that's nearing completion. I'm going to come back to this with fresh eyes after I eat some lunch, and then just see whether or not that's complete. And if I do any more, I'll post a little image of it when I'm finished, just after this video. I think that'll do.